Now, traveling with an e-mountain bike can be a bit of a challenge, purely down to their size and the weight. And unless you've got a big van or a car with a tow bar mounted rack, it can become quite a hassle. So today, I'm giving you a load of tips on how to fit an e-bike into absolutely any car. So this is the Ford Fiesta. It's capable of carrying 5 adults. So let's take a look at how we're going to fit this into that. Now, something that might make your life a little bit easier when it comes to stripping your bike before you put it into the car is going to be using a work stand. And yes, it will make it definitely a lot easier, but they are very bulky and you don't want to be taking up all that space in your car with a work stand. So a lot of us are going to be working on our bikes upside down on the floor. Now, a couple of options to protect your bike. Of course, you want to protect the saddle, the bars, the control unit, maybe a Garmin, things like that. You could either lay something nice and soft down like a blanket, or simply wrap those controls in bubble wrap, or simply chock it off the ground. You definitely don't want to be damaging any of this stuff because it can be very expensive. Right, first things first, I'm going to remove the battery from the bike. Now, this is going to make the bike a lot lighter to lift in and out of the car. And of course, it's actually illegal in some countries to carry your e-bike in the car with the battery plugged in. So I'm just going to wrap that in a cloth, stick it in the footwell, keep it safe. Now, before I flip the bike upside down to take the rest of the components off, I'm going to slam that seat down out of the way. That way it's going to give you a load of clearance. Right, so I'm going to create that nice soft padded area to start stripping this bike down. That's just going to protect my saddle and my handlebars. Let's flip her upside down. Now, before you flip it upside down, just remove any of those things that are obviously going to get damaged. I've got my Garmin on there. Just push that mount down. It looks pretty good to me. So flip it upside down. Make sure you're on that same patch, saddle at the back. Handlebars nice and protected. Now we're going to start removing some of those bigger components. Right, it's time to remove the wheels from the bike. Now, you might only have to remove the front wheel out of the bike to fit it in the car, obviously depending on the size of the car that you're putting it into. But this is pretty simple. We've got a quick release front wheel, so we're going to flick that lever, wind the axle out, whip that out, simply pull upwards on the front wheel. Now stick your axle back in the forks, because if you lose that, you're not going to be riding anywhere. Just wind it back in. You don't want to over tighten these things, just so it nips up nice and tight. And then we're going to put a brake chock into the front caliper to stop those pads closing up if you were to accidentally knock that brake lever. Super annoying if you get to the trails and you can't even get your front wheel in. So that's in place. And if you haven't got those brake chocks that came with your bike, you can, of course, make this out of something like cardboard. It is a good idea to have something in there, but it's not the end of the world. If you can't find it, you can push those pads back. Now let's take that back wheel out to fit it into this car. Right, time to whip this back wheel out. Now, if you're not in the smallest cog in the cassette, you need to downshift into it. That way, it's going to make removing that wheel a lot easier. Once it's in that smallest cog, you just need to look at your derailleur. And if you've got Shimano one on there, you need to turn the clutch off. So move the lever down into the off position. If you're running a SRAM rear mech, you can lift the cage and push that padlock button in, and that will hold the mech and give you a load of slack. Then it's time to get the axle out of the bike. This is going to be different designs, but on this, again, it's a pull-out lever, pretty much the same as the front. You just wind the axle out. We're winding this out, pull it out, pull your cage up and out, and just pull that back wheel straight upwards, guiding it out of the disc, and remove that rear wheel. And again, stick that rear wheel axle back into the bike and chock that caliper like we did on that front brake. Right, next thing we're going to remove is the pedals off the bike. Now, this just gives you a few more inches of movement and space in the car. Now, when it comes to removing pedals, you have a left-hand thread on the non-drive side pedal, and on the drive side pedal, you have a right-hand thread, so don't get messing that up. So you're going to take those pedals off, and don't forget to put the pedals back into your car and the Allen key, because you get to your riding spot and you haven't got either of those, you're not going anywhere. Right, so that's the basics of all the components that you need to remove to fit into an average car. But maybe if you're carrying 2 bikes or you're really struggling for space, you can do a few more things to make that bike even smaller. Now, something that's prone to damage on the back of the bike is going to be the rear derailleur when you're transporting it. Now, it's a good idea just to whip the bolt out for this and let it hang freely. You can, of course, zip tie it or wrap it up in some bubble wrap in between your seat stays just to protect it a bit more. But removing it out of the equation, it's going to give you a few more inches on the back end of the bike. Then at the front of the bike, if you're really struggling for space to fit it into the car, you can, of course, remove your bar and stem out of the way, or at least loosen the stem and rotate those handlebars round. But removing it out of the equation is definitely going to give you a bunch of space. Don't forget to protect your frame from the bars if they are clanging around. Just strap it up, put some bubble wrap or some protection between it to not damage this nice paintwork. Right, that's the bike fully stripped down. Let's take a look inside the car and start making some space. So first thing we're going to do is, if you've got a partial shelf, you want to get that out of the way, maybe even leave it at home. Then you're going to drop the rear seats. Now, some cars might have a split rear seat, meaning you can keep one seat up, maybe if you're carrying a passenger, but we're not going to be doing that today. So we're going to drop both those seats and give us as much room as possible. For the height of the handlebars and the forks, a great way of increasing that space is by removing the pressure out of your fork. If you've got an air fork, you can do this fairly easily. All you're going to do is connect a shock pump to the valve on the top of the fork and depress a button to let the air out of that fork nice and slowly. That way, all that air pressure is gone. You've got a fork that is literally going to be bottomed out and you've gained yourself quite a few inches. Just don't forget that shock pump to pump your forks back up at the other end. Right, let's drop these seats out of the way nicely. Drop this other one as well. Oh, loads of room. Now, a great way of gaining a little bit more space in that rear cabin is to move the passenger seat forward. So you slide it forward on the rails, right forward, and of course you can wind it and tilt that back of the seat forward. Just make sure you can see that near side mirror if you are winding that seat fully forward. That way you're going to get a load of space in the back and hopefully that bike should fit in pretty easy. So if you've got a nice clean car, you probably want to think about protecting your interior. Now, you can of course get tailor-made mats that go inside the back of the car to protect it and your rear bumper, or you can just do it fairly cheaply with a tarpaulin or just a blanket. Particularly on those muddy rides, you want to protect that interior from all the mud and gunk that's going to drop from your bike. Just make sure it's all protected. The back of the seats is definitely key to protect here, and the roof lining as well. Mud on that, definitely not going to please your partner. Then it's a case of just lifting that bike into the car. Now, a great way of doing this is just by grabbing the fork stanchion, grabbing the seat tube. It's just a really nice way of distributing the weight of that bike fairly easily. Then just going to slide it into the car, tilt the handlebars, make sure you don't hit your bumper. You can of course rest the bike in as you're going bit by bit. If you're not feeling that strong, you can get a friend in through the door to lift that bike the whole way through. So I'm just going to slide it in, okay, just gently, just make sure we're not damaging any components. Just make sure you are putting that bike in derailleur side up, because if you put derailleur side down, you can of course bend that derailleur fairly easily. So it's nice and secure in there. Just going to make sure the door's all shut. Right, so just check that space into the handlebars to the door card, and it's not going to hit it, so just shut that door nice and gentle. Right, now we're just going to protect the frame and use that same blanket that we used for stripping the bike down. Give it a bit of a shake off. If you've got some horrible gunk on it, just chuck it in. Obviously your fork stanchions, your paintwork is the main areas we're looking to protect. And obviously if you've got those pedals still on the bike, they can really scratch up some of those other components. So she's nicely tucked in there. Then we're going to chuck the wheels in, and wheels definitely need a bit of care too. Right, time to chuck the wheels in. Now with the wheels, I always like to put my wheels in with the rotors facing up. That way they're not going to get damaged and they're not going to get contaminated by possibly touching the drivetrain on your bike. So front wheel in, and then the back wheel. Now this is quite important with this. I tend to go with the free wheel and the free hub body facing up, because some free hubs and the cassette can actually fall off that free hub body, and you can end up at your location with that cassette falling off of it and a load of springs and pulls. Trying to connect it all back up isn't going to be a good start to the trail. And again, just make sure you're not contaminating your front disc with that dirty cassette. So stick that out of the way. Just make sure you're not damaging it at all. And a great way of protecting your wheels if you want to do a really good job, it's by getting some wheel bags. That is going to give you the utmost protection. Right, last things to do is just secure that bike in there. You can ratchet strap it to stop it shifting around. I'm going to chuck a blanket over the whole lot just to stop prying eyes in there if I were to stop at some services or grab a bite to eat. And I'm also going to chuck a lock around my bike and just connect it to the seat mounting as well, just to stop that bike if it was to be like a smash and grab. It's just going to slow those people down. But that's it, she's in there, ready to go. Oh, and one last thing, don't forget the tools to rebuild your bike at the other end, and of course all your riding kit too. So if you can't fit your e-bike into the back of your car, or your car's too nice to put a bike in, then something that's definitely worth considering is going to be a bike rack. Now these come in lots of different options. You have the boot mounted option, which is no tow bar needed. It simply straps onto the back of the car. You can adjust it, but the main thing about these racks is going to be the weight limit that they can carry, usually around 45 kilos. So you're going to get one e-bike on there, maximum really. You don't want two on there. You can of course take wheels and batteries out to lighten the load of those bikes to get within that area. But I suggest you only put one e-bike on one of those. But the ultimate solution is going to be a tow bar mounted rack. Yes, it costs a bit more money, but they're definitely more suited for e-bike use. And you don't want that bike falling off the back of your car at the end of the day. So how much is it going to cost to transport your e-bike via a rack? Well, that boot mounted rack, that's going to be the cheapest option. And they come in from around £75 up to around £250. And the one on screen is definitely a good option. It fits most cars out there, and you can definitely carry one e-bike on there with ease. And as I mentioned, that tow bar mounted bike rack is definitely going to be the best and the most safest option for transporting one or maybe more e-bikes on that tow bar mounted rack. And these come in at around £350 for that entry level rack, all the way up to around £650 for that premium rack. So there you go, that's all the tips that I have for fitting your e-bike into absolutely any car out there. If you've got any space-saving tips or any little hacks you've got for getting your e-bike into the car that we've left out, get involved in the comments box down below. Give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to us here on EMBN. Check these new jackets out in the merch shop, and we shall see you in the next one.